So this is going to be part 2, and in this I'm going to try and explain some of the things you could derive from these analogies. So, the fourth dimension is the application of the third dimension's toroidal properties. So we would call this the third dimension's toroidal properties. And when we describe the dimensions, I often find that a dimension is a terrible word because it gets overused. Dimension could mean another parallel universe. Dimension could mean like space-time and it could mean space-time and energy, but it could, as many people think of it, as like length, width, and height. And that's why dimension is just an overused word. It doesn't make any fucking sense when people extrapolate it to different things that have a limited amount of correlation. So, space has height, width, and length. And we would call that the second dimension's properties of height, width, and length. And so I just call that space, or the second dimension, right? What I refer to as the third dimension, what I try and use the word dimension to mean, is what I believe the universe is made up of and how I believe the universe was laid out, which is time, space, and energy. So I think time would be probably first, because when you look at how you would try and discover it, it's mapped out in a very linear way. Time travels in one direction, and theoretically in another direction, but regardless, it's still a ray. Whether or not you're going forward or backward in time, there's only one time, you know? There's only, you're either going forwards or you're going backwards, or you're popping from one point to another, or another point to, if you're time traveling or something like that, right? But regardless of whatever you're doing, there's only one fucking way to display time. Now in space, things get a little bit funnier. So in space, I think you would use the length, width, and height as like a singular block, a point in space, because you could never define a single point, but you could define a range. So you're defining a block, not a box, but a square. I'm sorry, not a square, but a box. And so that would be, to me, how space would be represented in that trigonal kind of pattern. But dimensions, as I would like to think of them, should be displayed as time, space, and energy, because you have time written this way, right? And then once you incorporate time, you can incorporate space, because you have space-time. And theoretically, because you can never identify a point in space without also identifying a point in time, because the universe is constantly moving relative to the Big Bang, and in order to discover where you are in the universe, you need at least a second point, right? Well, since you can't ever define a second point without defining where matter is relative to time, then you have to incorporate it as space-time. It's kind of it's just a formality of the fact that we're too stupid to, pick out a singular point in space. But theoretically, if you do think of it as space-time, you could calculate a point in space and then completely disregard the calculation of space-time, and then just revert back to using it as time, space, and energy, which is the way we should probably be thinking about it anyways. Then, of course, overlaid on top of space and time is... Ow. I'm sitting on the floor hurting my feet. That's energy would be sitting on top. And so we would think of energy as being it could be a photon, it could be matter, it could be the Higgs boson, it could be any particle that is not space and not time. Although people would argue that the Higgs boson is what makes up space, but I don't know about that. I don't know anything about that. I'd have to read more. But it doesn't make much sense to have a particle be space, unless that particle does not interact with, for the most part, energy, which I believe space does impact energy, so I'll have to think about that more. And so in that sense, this next statement might be total bullshit. Because if I'm wrong about that, then I'm wrong about this. But anyways, what I was thinking was the third dimensional, the third dimension, so that's energies, toroidal properties, see? Energies, third dimension is energy, so the third dimension's toroidal properties. When you fire a bullet, it makes a toroid in the air around it, right? So the bullet would be the cause, and the disturbance in the air would be the chaos, and the eventual eddy currents that generate out of that chaos become the order. So the fourth dimension is the application of energy's toroidal properties to a singular dimension, likely energy. So normally what we would do when we try and describe something, for instance, when we try and describe the properties of energy, right? We would describe the properties of elements or matter, right, as like a two-dimensional plane. Now that doesn't make much sense when you describe it as a two-dimensional plane. And as people would often admit, the periodic table is not a great representation. It's good, but it's not great. And other people have created three-dimensional representations of the periodic table that are better but more complex. Now, I think the problem is not trying to represent it two-dimensionally, which if you were representing it two-dimensionally, you'd be basing it off of pretty much one thing, the number of protons versus the number of electrons, and then noticing that some things are correlated to that. Like electrons are correlated to the number of protons, but that's basically, the number of protons is what the periodic table is based upon. So, then you could build a third-dimensional, or like in space, the third dimension of space, you could build basically a two-dimensional version, as opposed to a one-dimensional, which is just, let's stop using the word dimension, because that confuses me. So, what was I saying? Oh yeah. So you can't really represent elements in like a flat plane, or even in the second dimension, or space, which many people would call the third dimension, but I just call it the second dimension because energy is really the third dimension, not space. Space is the second. So I would say, and that's only in the terms of like how I refer to the word dimension, because I think it's easier that way. It gets confusing when you do it in other ways. So, to try and wrap this up in the last second here, I believe that the toroidal properties of a singular dimension like space should be represented as a toroid, as a link in a cause and effect chain, as in something is occurring, and other things happen, one thing goes over here, another thing goes here, but it's an event that takes place over time. It is energy as it transpires throughout space and time. And so in order to describe what happens in, say, the periodic table of elements, we would probably have to describe it as an event. So it would be applying the third dimension toroidal properties to a single dimension like energy. Fifth dimension, maybe you apply that same third, an event kind of property, like the third dimension, energy's dimension of toroidal properties, which would be an event. So the energy's events being applied as a property to the time-space continuum could create time travel. Anyways, so I was wondering, if you leave disorder only to create more reducing resistance, does that lead to less chaos? Wait, what? Leave disorder only to create more reducing resistance leads to less chaos. Is goal to create effect or simply be above it? And then I kind of thought about this when I said, don't believe them when they come, avoid chaos. And I was, specifically thinking about space aliens. Yeah. But, these are really the important parts. When you leave disorder, right, you only create more. See? Once the effect chaos chain begins, you create more order, but then you eventually break off and begin creating more disorder. Eventually you'd create nothing but disorder. So I thought, if you're creating nothing but disorder every time you leave disorder, then reducing resistance leads to less chaos, which is good. Good for us. Good for non-gods. Good for proto-gods to have less chaos. So is goal to create effect, or simply be above it? Effect being chaos, right? So do you want to stop, do you want to create chaos, or do you want to be above chaos? Well, if reducing resistance leads to less chaos, right? In the way to reduce resistance, the way to reduce resistance is to have a more unified power, right? So we would say that the greater the purity of the power of the cause, I know, right? The greater the purity and power of the cause, the greater the longevity of the effects of the order. So, a smart dude once said, divide and rule is a sound motto. Unite and lead is a better one. And he's totally fucking right. Because according to this generalized theory, the greater the purity and power of the cause, which is this singular thing, the less of that cause is going to pull off, the less of that shit that pulls off and tries to go in a different direction, means the less resistance. The less resistance, the less chaos. Is the goal to create chaos or simply be above chaos? And I would argue that if you want to have longevity, or even build your order, right, your order, then you're going to need significantly less chaos. So, I figured when space aliens come here, because they're all about this Illuminati bullshit, and all of their offspring constantly babble about, well, order from chaos, order from chaos. The constantly all the, the nasty, not the Nas lyrics, the Roz Cause lyrics, right? Yeah, anybody who likes Roz Cause, and everybody else, fuck you. But, order out of chaos is one of the prime statements of the prime evils. Is that they believe that once you have chaos, order comes, but that's kind of bullshit because you get shittier and shittier order every time you have chaos. So when the aliens come and they say that we need more chaos in order to survive better, I would say that you should not believe them when they come and that you should avoid chaos because you want to be above chaos, not living in it and creating it. So, anyways, all that crap leads me out to say this. Strength in order, or orders, because, technically there are more than one life form created from any one event of chaos, so I just wrote orders, noting that it could be life forms. So strength in order comes from strength of cause. Strength of cause comes from unanimity, unity, and I think the best word to use is universal application. So avoid desire, illogical want, and adhere to purpose, reason, and need. And one of the things you could derive from that would be that whole don't be a taker, be a leaver kind of thing, right? But I mean, avoiding desire, illogical want, and adhering to purpose, reason, and need, that's basically like a Buddhist or some other bullshit, whatever. So, cause becomes resistance, as we noted here. Cause becomes resistance, and resistance becomes cause. So you'll note that my left hand is not so good at doing this. I'm sorry. My right hand is so much more steady than my left one. Cause becomes resistance, just on the edges, right here, really, at this exact moment here, where the resistance heading downward and the cause heading upward are creating turbulence. That folds over, becomes resistance, then it folds back around, and becomes the cause again. Or at least the original cause. But while it's over here, one could argue that it is its own cause. Anyways, as a final point, based on everything I've said here, I would argue that you should avoid resistance to avoid fractals in cause-effect chain. Because when things repeat over and over and over again, that's bad. We notice that you get trapped in what I would call insanity, which is repetition, right? If you just keep repeating the same shit over and over and over again, it's like, shoot me, fucking die, go insane. So I feel like you should avoid resistance if you want to avoid insanity, because you just keep repeating the same fucking fractals over and over again. You're going nowhere fast, basically. So that's my theory, and now I'm going to erase everything on this